Welcome, Grove Loaded. In this week's episode of 20 Tech Topics, we got a lot more news to talk about, and we're going to start off with AMD and Zen 6. Moore's Law is Dead did have a great video on the rumors there, and I highly recommend you go check him out. He had that wrap up at a loose ends that he has at the end of the month, beginning of the next month, and so he had that monthly wrap up. And he had some information there with Zen 6 coming out, and it looks pretty impressive. We'll see what it can hit. Rumors are saying that there's going to be, 6 gigahertz, which is probably going to get all the headlines like he mentioned. But some of the other stuff underneath of going to N2P for a lot of this, which I think is really impressive. AMD looks like they're going to go on the cutting edge on a lot of these process nodes, and out there making more money. They can afford to do that and work with TSMC to make sure, or whichever fab they go with. TSMC is the logical one, but maybe in the future they might do something else. But you work with these fabs and you're saying, well, we want the cutting edge nodes because we can now afford those cutting edge nodes, and with the engineering behind it, you hopefully can get a impressive processor. Now, there have been some patents coming out as well for different things, and Cortex actually had a good video on going through some of that, of what he expects with GPUs and etc. And I think that's more of a future look at things. But sticking to Zen 6 here, of kind of the other big thing that Moore's Law is Dead was doing is some of the power stuff and some of the organization, just looking at the chip overall, of making sure you have the memory speeds that can feed all these cores, because they're going to increase the core count. You have the better power management overall. I think that's a lot of that. While you may not hit the desktop is going to be the headline, right, of the 7 gigahertz, a lot of the other little stuff to the processor, how they're tweaking, improving the IPC, etc., is something that I'm really interested in, and I want to see where it goes, and hopefully we'll be able to get more and more information on this as we go forward. But take a look at what Moore's Law is Dead has said. I don't want to ruin everything here, because he deserves breaking that as well. But it seems like AMD is not resting on just being, hey, we have a good processor and we have to just do an Intel. We're going to go quad core forever. It seems like what they're trying to do is, Intel is going to come out with more, E cores and do another P core. Their rumor is that they're going to have a big processor, and we are, making sure that we don't get behind. And well, it, Intel could easily have more core counts, right? Easily with the E cores, you can do a lot of stuff like that and get a high core count. But AMD putting in the performance cores, 24, 48 threads, being able to do that at a desktop level to be able to compete with Intel on, at least getting close to the core count, right? When overall threads is something that I actually like to see. For years I thought, when AMD was coming out with the 8 cores and stuff, that Intel would be right there, right behind. It wasn't the case, and it took Intel a little while to get there. And now AMD is not taking that same approach. They're actually saying, we have to do this. And I think one thing that to come out of this too is that gaming will be improved over the years. I think they're going to take advantage of maybe doing 12 core multi-threading. We even see there's been multi-threading stuff in the game engine. I'm blanking on it right now. It'll come to me. But new game engine, Unreal. There we go. See, told you it'll come to me. 5.6, right, does some more multi-threading stuff. And as that gets more prominent, especially in game engines and everywhere else, it takes a little time. I get it. It takes time to figure out the bugs and everything else, right? I've done multi-threading stuff too. But it is one thing where you keep improving this, and all of a sudden, having that 8 core as your mid-range, right? Which is really what I wanted to see. I want to see that 8 core as the mid-range for gaming, and then so everyone's just going to 8 core matches. I don't know where the consoles are going to go, but you do that. You have 8 cores as the minimum, basically entry level there for the gaming, and then you have 12 cores for that ideal sweet spot, and we'll see how well it performs there. I think that as games move forward, it's going to be pretty cool to see, to have that across the board, and especially the old games will run really well, especially on the A core. So well, let's move on to the next topic here, which I think is I actually had another AMD one, or I thought I had another AMD one, but there's a lot of different news this week, because I was lazy and behind it. But we're going to talk about some of the AMD GPU stuff as before we get into some of the Nvidia stuff, which is and there's been some, talk about the AI, especially on the business side, right? And what are people buying AMD GPUs for? And the analysis is on this is just saying, hey, you know what they're doing? They're just buying AMD GPUs to make price check Nvidia. And while that could be the case, I am interested if this is actually true. We'll see, financials going forward in this next quarter and the quarter after, because now that MI 350 is out and 355, we are going to be able to better see if it's just a price check or if there's larger orders here and they're taking advantage of some of the AMD code and ROCm and everything else they have to have better efficiency and better performance, right? I don't know if they all have better efficiency. I have to go through that again. I'm trying to remember, but that's one thing I was thinking about here is that while yeah, I get it. Companies probably do want to price check Nvidia, right? If you're the only game in town and they are doing a great job at selling this, yeah, it's gonna be AMD's cheaper. We want to make sure that we're getting a better deal. But let's say that you are just doing it to price check. Eventually, Nvidia is going to catch on and say, well, you either got to go with this is our price and that's where it's going to be, and you have to then make the choice of, yeah, actually AMD is a better value and we actually have to go there, or they're going to call your bluff and you're still paying what Nvidia said you're going to have to pay and you got nowhere. So that's one thing that you have to worry about as Nvidia, or I should say one thing to worry about as these companies to Nvidia, because they will eventually sniff it out. I think that's happened more than once that they will try to do that. So yeah, it was an interesting read there from analysis on that. So quarter three, I think these are all, the MI 350s are all out if I recall correctly. Yeah, so Q3, so I expect Q3 and Q4 to show some difference in that and some gain in AI. If there is gain in AI, then I do expect that AMD is actually selling these and they're being used, not just a price check. Because if you're doing it, and even if you're going to buy them just a price check and you're going to have hardware sitting there and not using it, that just seems a little weird to me. It just, I don't like having hardware sit around that's unused and you just spent all that money for it. It's just, it's not a great feeling. And let's talk about one other thing before we get into a little bit about GPU prices. But Hardware Unbox, was testing the RX 9070 XT with the Nvidia 57 Ti, if I recall. Yeah, I think that was what it was. 8 gig or 16 gig. They were doing, 16 gig, not the 8 gig, because nobody's testing 8 gig. But they were doing that, and to clarify, Tech Yes City and testing games. Also, we're trying to compare the launch driver to the current driver and to see if there was any performance differences. They did not get any, while Hardware Unbox did have a difference in the driver. And so there's a little bit there with this. I want to mention it because I think, I've taken watched a lot of videos of Hardware Unbox. They did, I think they do a overall good job in testing. And then I do watch a lot of Tech Yes City, and I think he does a great perspective in testing as well. And they found, when they didn't find any improvement here, it led to some questions. And so I think that there is, some questions that Hardware Unbox did put out statements that I don't want to directly or individually address. Videos discussing the 9070 XT testing I did recently. Those videos did misunderstand the test, but unfortunately I didn't explain in the video uh, as well as I should have, and did suggest that the bulk of the gains in at least one instance were a result from display drivers. In reality, it could be a number of things, and he goes on from there in this tweet. Um, so what he's doing is, to avoid confusion, he should have did review data versus latest data, and rather than review drivers and latest drivers. Well, yeah, because you have to. Yeah, so if there are different separate datas, right, you can run into this where you have to run the same game at the same update, the same PC. Who knows what the SSDs are, right? That was suggested by Tech Yes City. There's a lot of different stuff in there that can cause different things, right, and cause different results. So it's a hard problem. It will always be a hard problem because as much as you want to keep hardware the same and games the same, if you're off by anything, even in software, guess what? That's all just thrown out data, right? So that is there. I wanted to mention that, but then let's talk about a little bit. Gamers Nexus talked about MSRP for Nvidia and AMD graphics cards, a little bit even about Intel ones there as well, which yeah, he kind of put it this way: is MSRP just the illusion for release day, so everyone kind of has a reference point, and from there it doesn't matter anymore? It kind of looks like that. One thing I did want to get to this week, which I didn't do, been busy week. Sorry that there's only one video out this week, but I'm trying to get my schedule's kind of opening up again there, so should be my plan is more videos per week, right? And this is one that I have on there. I want to go through some and see where graphics card prices sit, because one thing I do want to do is build another computer, right, or two, right, replace the Xbox or something. So with a built computer, so I've been thinking, like, what can I do? Like, what is this going to be here? And so far, I've been, waiting on graphics prices to get back to MSRP. Well, I think they can get back to MSRP now. Granted, there's tariffs and everything else, right? Shipping, all that stuff, fuel prices, all that stuff you have to take into account, right? All that affects it in one way or another. But I expect them to get closer down to where they were, and Gamers Next just kind of went through it and stuff, especially the 8 gig cards. They're not selling, and guess where they're sitting, right? There's supply and demand and a lot of this too. So that's one thing, we have to keep our eyes out for as this goes forward, and maybe going through some of the prices here and seeing where they are will tell me some things in the next week. But it was an interesting video from Gamers Nexus, and these videos of looking at where prices are and going through them do take a lot of work. And so I congratulate him for doing that. So let's jump into Nvidia here. And Nvidia has a new branch of drivers. It's a preview driver. It's 590.26, so it's a new preview driver it has smooth motion frame generation. So this is a updated new feature, kind of, right? Well, it's a new feature for the 40 series, I should put it that way. So you can turn on this smooth motion in the new 590 branch, and kind of, if you're into that with smooth motion, you get this, right? It's one of those things, the driver, but Nvidia does have a new preview driver. I want to mention that. 590 will eventually be coming down to all of us, and we'll get to take advantage of it, right? So that's pretty, normal. So so DLSS is now a plugin is there for Unreal Engine 5.6. So if you want DLSS in your Unreal Engine for the latest engine, or for 5.6 Unreal Engine, you can be able to do that. That's I expected that to be coming and going from there, but now it's official. We finally got it, And that's kind of all we had for Nvidia this week, or all I had on my list. Again, it was a busy week, so I've been trying to keep all my news that I had read through up, but we'll we'll see how well I do. Um, let's see. I thought I had something on here on Intel, but maybe I was wrong, and maybe we're just getting into some of the gaming stuff and Microsoft stuff and layoff stuff. But oh yeah, my tabs were out of order. Is that normal? Yes, that's normal. Here we go. And here we go. So Sapphire is launching a B580 or B850, man, and a B650A, both a motherboard. So this is kind of interesting now. These boards are not available outside of China, which fine. I'd like to see them elsewhere. You know, I like to try them. They look kind of interesting, right? They got 2.5 gig Ethernet AM5. Granted, they're the A, you know, they are an A on there, so I'm guessing they're not as extreme as, you know, some of the other ones, but they they do have a lot of interesting stuff on here that I was reading, and WCCF Tech had it, and yeah, um, yeah, a little, you know, this B650 is a little bit older chipset. Did I say 850? Yeah, 850 and 650A. So, well, you know, 650 is a little bit older, not as fast as memory on it. 850 has a little bit faster memory, but it's one that I'm like, you know what, I'd like to be able to try it out, especially because a lot of Sapphire stuff I've used over the years has been pretty good. On the graphics card side, maybe they can make a good motherboard, be in the competition, and kind of shake it up a little bit, especially if they keep up with BIOS updates, unlike MSI on some of their boards, which that's a whole other story. Actually, we're going to get into that here in a second, not directly MSI, but BIOS updates. So it's one of those things where I would like to try it out. It looks pretty interesting, and you know, you have a 12 to 1 phases on there. Man, it looks like it would have been fun to see here, but maybe someday they'll get those out there and compete over here as well, but we'll see. And this one is one I wanted to talk about too, where there is TPM issues, right? With, you remember this back in like 2022 ish, where there was TPM issues for AMD boards, and they just weren't working right. And some people are still having those issues on the Ryzen CPUs, but we thought that was been done since 2022. It's, you know, and here the thing is that, you know, Microsoft's, you know, talking about it here a little bit, that you know, the ASP firmware TPM might fail with error code blah. I'm not going to say that on a Windows system. This issue resolved on later version of the AMD firmware. Consult your device manufacturer and firmware releases for which firmware versions contain the update. So, well, this has been, you know, well over a year, well, 18 months now, right? We're wondering, where is this? And well, you'd expect this to actually, you know, get fixed, or you get updates. Now, AMD said that they resolved the issue and provided motherboard manufacturers in 2022 with the fix. And they have gone through saying, you know, the manufacturers chose not to redistribute these TPM firmware updates, and BitLocker users can suspend BitLocker during these TPM firmware updates, which may clear the TPM outside of the Windows API. If you do not suspend BitLocker, the computer may enter recovery mode, and restarting may recover recovery key or password to access it, right? And if you still don't have it, guess what? Contact your motherboard manufacturer customer service department to determine if there's a firmware update available. And this is one thing why I do like companies to go through and keep updating firmware. I was up at my parents', they're running a 3400G in a B450 board. They actually have two of them. One is a MSI board, one is a Gigabyte board. Guess what? The Gigabyte board did have a firmware update. They're still giving out firmware updates for that Gigabyte board. MSI, I've been waiting for them to get some of the same fixes and stuff that they have out there, and this is, my frustration with some motherboard manufacturers and their motherboard. You could say, oh, the motherboard doesn't sell, they want to support it, fine. But I like to see when AMD puts out fixes that they get propagated out, because guess what? Which board you think I'm more likely to buy the next time? Happens to be I bought a lot more Gigabyte boards lately than MSI boards. In fact, I have not bought an MSI board that I can recall in any recent machine. It's been Gigabyte. Um, let's see, I worked on an Asus board, and so that one still got, there was, oh yeah, I checked up, my neighbor has an Asus board, and so I pulled that up. Guess what just got an update? Asus boards got an update. Now, Asus has had their problems here within the last year or so. J2Sense, you know, I think Gamers Nexus and stuff have talked about it. But guess what? You still get a BIOS update, and so you start looking at this. ASRock, you know, they've had their problems, but guess what? When I had their board, they were updating it too. And so you start to wonder, hey, the one thing you have to look at and you have to consider when building a computer is, are they going to be able to update and move this forward? So, and keep up to date with what AMD is giving you. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So let's talk about some Windows stuff here real quick. Windows is talking about how you can get to Windows 10 ESU. So this is for extended security updates. They did talk about this a little bit. Microsoft is rolling this out, and so they have some key guides for Office PCs. So great for those systems that Microsoft wants to put into e-waste into a landfill. There's a option here for these key updates for extended security updates. You know, I just wanted to roll that out, that they had this out there, and I think you guys all know my thoughts on this, of what this arbitrary thing, and so yeah, I'll leave it there because that's a whole nother video and I can't go too long on this. Microsoft Edge is now faster, so Neowind had this as well, and so it's faster. Yay. They're doing it down to claiming that now they're below 300 milliseconds for load times and stuff, some of the stuff, the UI, so that's good. I mean, significant improvements are always fun to see here. I use Edge sometimes. It's one of the browsers that I have up, but it's not my main one, just because I don't think on other browsers I use, I feel like that's faster. Now, it's a feel, or actually I think it's faster, these other browsers. I could be wrong. Maybe I'll have to test it out now. But I'm liking to see that people are finally going through. Now, if you are in like the IT side doing some VM stuff and you need to kind of update to your host and stuff, so there's VTPM now, right? Windows 11, you get all this stuff you need. So Microsoft has a detailed guide of Windows 11 requirements when you've been moving those VMs, which is not as easy as people think. Because Microsoft decided to not go through and do it right. And then one thing I really want to talk about here is there is a bad reinstaller app out there. So it's not an official one, and it's a completely not official. Do not install, do not use it. It's a Windows reinstaller app. It locks you out of your PC, and you have to pay if you want to get access. Now, don't do it. It's a scammer, and it's another one of those things where just want to put a warning out there. You see something suspicious, just don't download it and use it. Make sure it's the right thing, and you don't screw something up on your computer. Just be aware of that. It's out there, and so yeah, we don't want people to go down this path and have issues, right? So I did have an Intel story, but we're going to loop this into the gaming side because I think it's kind of interesting. So there's a DXVK, right, which is the Vulkan-based translation layer for DirectX 3D 8, 9, 10, 11. for, and Intel uses it on their GPUs, and it's, it supports for Linux gaming a lot, right? But this is also on Linux GPU or Intel GPUs. That DXVK 2.7 brings a lot of fixes and improvements, and this is one thing where and improvements, especially for the ARC GPUs, to have better support on Linux, right? I am interested to see how this all goes. I hope that there's a lot of work that gets put into this overall, because I'd like to have that translation layer across the board so we could have more games on Linux. And so if more Intel GPUs have better Linux support, maybe Intel even working on that will produce more GPUs. I have a feeling that this is not always going to be the case. Maybe they get rid of some of the dedicated ones, but have a really powerful and kind of like AMD's APU ones. That's fine. I think that's a happy medium until you kind of get your footing there and get everything ironed out, maybe. But yeah, so there's improvement there. I like to see that, and I like to see that they're moving in the right direction. I guess, where did I put this? LPDDR6 is a standard now. It's for faster mobile things, and guess what? Some AI stuff, right? For better AI. But LPDDR6 was announced by JEDEC, the new standard there. And then let's see. Oh yeah, this one. If you're gaming and you don't want all your games to be destroyed, this was an interesting one. So Team Group has announced a new SSD that's, what is it, the P25 or P250Q. It has a red button on it, and you can then press this red button for instant destruction of the data. Very interesting, kind of fun if you want to have something like that. But it's another, good, or I don't know if it's good. I can see it being used in certain scenarios. I don't think that this is for everyone, but let's say you have to transfer sensitive materials or industrials, right? And it just needs to have an option to erase with the red button. You have it now. So I like to see stuff like this. It's kind of fun to see and to go there. So more on Microsoft here. So a lot of the Microsoft layoffs, right? We talked a little bit about that. Unfortunately, a whole bunch of people got laid off, especially on the game side. I want to see more games, right? But report was, I was on WCCF Tech for this, is that the funds are actually for spending money in AI infrastructure. Okay, get better models, Microsoft, and then you can maybe convince me. This is, it's a shame. We'll see how this all goes, but they're billing it out. They're spending money there. On the Xbox side of Microsoft, though, right? There's been a lot of talk about Game Pass here. So I've read like 3 or 4 articles about all this Game Pass stuff, right? There was one that says it's Xbox, with the Game Pass is just not realistic at all, right? How they're making money and stuff like this, and their targets are not realistic. Now, one where Game Pass is making money but was excluding first-party games. Then there was one that, there's a former, I think, founder of Xbox say Xbox is unattainable, which, unsustainable, right? And it's not good for the industry at all, which I can see that. And then, Game Pass is even profitable when you're factoring in the loss of sales for first-party titles. So, what is it, right? There's a lot there overall. For me, here's what I think, is that Microsoft has to get some clear messaging first and foremost. If we're going to talk about that, Moore's Law is dead, and their weekly podcast had talked about some of the stuff with backwards compatibility, games, and everything else. That might be a different video. We'll see. I'm frustrated with Xbox because I don't think that they're putting a good plan forward and explaining to not only their fans but to the gaming industry of what their plans kind of are, right? You have a lot of games out there. Do you want your service to be part of that, or do you just want us to ignore your service completely and go elsewhere? Because Microsoft is very close to that. Now, Game Pass is a great value overall if you play a lot of games. It also introduces people to games that they may not play. And so, let's say you wouldn't buy the game and you're on Game Pass and you're like, oh, it's on Game Pass, let me try it. That's an option that, you know, we might have something here that people played a game that they wouldn't normally play. And so you have an extra quote unquote sale of a game, even though it's just, through the Game Pass that you didn't have before. So there is, some of those items I've been thinking about. And for me, I think Microsoft could really clear this up with, announcement of new console, right? Stuff like that. But for me, I think a lot of this is to put some clarity out there and be open about it. We are committed to Xbox. Now, yes, we are turning more items into Xbox, but we want to have a Xbox premium console, whatever that is, even if it's third parties making it, and we want you to have the best gaming experience here at Xbox, and we want to deliver games for that. There's stuff they could say, but I really don't know sometimes of what's going through the higher ups at Xbox a lot. So I know a lot of this comes down from their CFO and CEO, not of Xbox, but of Microsoft. And so this could be a lot of that there. And let's end on two different things here, which I forgot earlier. This episode is a mess. I did not have it in any particular order here. So Silicon Motion, right, I was on WCCF Tech and I was like, ooh, this is kind of interesting, is they're going into both, enterprise, and they want the consumer segment too, but they're going to have a Gen 6 SSD controller, and this is all enterprise there. It's called SM8466. It's 28 gigabytes per second and 512 terabyte capacity. So enterprise, right? I am interested to see what it all looks like. Maybe in a couple years they'll be on the used market for a price I can afford. Because really, I got some libraries. I don't need 512 gigs yet, but my storage box that, my media box backup does everything. Plex is on there, MB, Jellyfin, I'm trying them all, right? All that stuff, all that data, that's got a lot of data there. And a couple of these in a RAID would be really nice. Would be excellent. So that's just one thing I was thinking about there, and that's why I thought it was interesting. We'll add that in. And then we're going to end with EA. There's a report that EA is shelving Need for Speed franchise. For me, I did not play the last Need for Speed, but growing up, I did buy the Need for Speed game. I did have a lot of fun with Need for Speed, and it's just kind of one of those things where it's just like, it rips, just tears at you, rips out your heart. You're just like, ooh, this is one of those things where, I grew up on Need for Speed. It's one of those things I really liked. The shelving it again, and so my disappointment of my childhood of me playing games with Need for Speed of this, and I'm just like, this is kind of sad, right? So we just had the Battlefield 2 20th anniversary, right? And I'm looking at that and you're like, yeah, remember playing that game? Oh man, it's and then they're shelving this, right? Just a little pain out there, but I've ran along again. So I want to thank you all for watching. Thank you for supporting and liking, sharing, subscribing, watching Gray Overload. I really do appreciate it, and it's a ton of help to the channel. Sorry about not getting enough videos out this week. I do apologize. I will, get more out this next week. My schedule kind of is dying down. We're finishing up some coaching I was doing for my son, so games are now kind of ending Monday. So we'll be able to get back on here, get some more videos out, and hopefully what I'll be able to do is run down to a Micro Center and buy some hardware and build some computers. We got maybe the next door neighbor wants to do a computer build, so we've got maybe that project, and I want to do one, maybe two, and we do some computer build projects here and get some more builds out. I think there's a lot of hardware out, you know, even though it might be expensive. There's some deals there. That Micro Center had some tech deal days where if they keep these prices of these bundles in a good range, you can get the CPU RAM motherboard for a pretty good price, and then you just have to figure out what you're going to do on the GPU. You know, that's just the hard part now. So with that, thank you so much for all your support. Till next time, God bless.